When it comes to getting faster, there are three main things to focus on: mechanics, getting stronger, and most importantly, at the end of the day, if you want to run fast, then you need to run fast, and run fast consistently with progressive training modalities. This can also be said for jumping higher, changing direction, whichever facet of sports from which you're looking to improve. It's consistent and progressive effort with a proper training setup and knowledge base. Getting stronger allows an athlete to not only apply more force into whatever they're doing, but it also reduces an athlete's risk of injury during play. In this video, we're going to go over the basics of some of the foundational lifts, and in the next video, I'll talk about more of the details and important concepts to understand in order to be more efficient at lifting weights. The first lift to dive into is the squat. There are three main variations of the squat that we use over at the gym, including the goblet squat, a back squat, and a front squat. For the sake of this video, I'm going to just be talking about the goblet squat. Every single lift I go over in this video, I'm going to take a bottom-up approach to the setup. What that means is when setting up the lift, I will start off with the feet and work my way up the body. Set feet, set hips, set core, shoulders, and so on. When lifting, it's detrimental to initially focus on the setup. If you set up wrong, then the whole lift will most likely be wrong. When setting up your feet for a goblet squat, in general, your feet should be between hip width and shoulder width, with the toes slightly turned out. Feet spreading the floor, like we talked about in the last video. Arches locked and femur set. If you haven't watched the last video in this series on change direction, go check it out. It's really important for some of the concepts in this video. At the gym or over at Edge, I have all of my athletes start off squatting with heels elevated on a board, as you see here. Heels on the board, not too much, but also not going to slide off. Your posture should be nice and upright, shoulder blades down and back, elbows in, and head forward. When going into the squat, driving the knees out, keeping the heels down, back flat, and core tight. The movement should be controlled down and up. As I tell my athletes, think like an elevator going down and up. It should be smooth, controlled, and not jerky. Also, when you're going down, you should really be almost pulling yourself down in the position, not just letting the weight push you down. There are a ton more details I can go over on all these lifts in this video. But the general idea for this video and the other video is to give Edge's athletes or any athletes watching a simple and specific overview to set up a strong foundation to train. Give some visuals and break down each movement, making it easy to digest and implement quickly. Next lift is an upper body exercise, the dumbbell bench press. Start by sitting at the very edge of the bench and placing the dumbbells on your thighs like you see me doing here. Then as you go to lay down on the bench, bring the dumbbells up to your shoulders. Once you're laying down, set your feet firmly on the floor and on the outside of the bench. The feet should be flat on the floor or heels slightly off the ground, but all while pressing your feet into the floor with tension the whole lift. From here, squeeze your glutes, tuck your shoulder blades down and back on the bench. The shoulder setup has a lot more details to it, but I'm not going to go over them here, but in the gym I will. I start my athletes off with a simple neutral grip, like you see here, where the handle of the dumbbell is parallel to my body and remains that way for all of the reps. Once everything is set up and locked in, simply push the dumbbells up directly over the shoulder. Then very controlled, bringing the dumbbell back down to the start point, slightly under the shoulder and kind of in the armpit. Next, going into a core exercise, that is a simple elbow plank. When setting up, take a hip-width foot position while dorsiflexing the feet, which means pulling your toes towards your shins. This is a common uncued component of elbow planks that's really important. A lot of athletes or coaches are so worried about the elbow position, they forget about the feet. There are 4 points of contact on the floor in a plank, not just 2, your elbows. Once your feet are set into position and firmly locked into the floor, set your elbows up directly underneath your shoulders. The back should be flat, hips locked in position, not drooping. Eyes should be looking straight down between the wrists and hands directly in front of the elbows. Some common things done wrong that I think it's important to go over. A, sagging the hips or stomach down. B, looking at your feet and shooting your butt up in the air. C, collapsing at the feet. And finally, D, not keeping the shoulders over the elbows. So be aware of these issues and bad positions when doing plank. There are 2 more lifts that I'm going to be going over, and the fourth is the deadlift. The first and most important part of the deadlift to start off with is teaching what's called a hip hinge. This movement is not only foundational to deadlifting, but to other lifts, jumping, and other movements in sports. You see here from the side me hip hinging or simply hinging at the hips. Think like a door hinge or a door opening and closing, but instead of a door hinge, it's my hips and me bringing my upper body closer to my lower body, all while moving through that hinge. My feet are hip width, and as I push my butt back, hinging through the hips, my knees bend initially, but don't track too far forward. As I get lower and lower into the hinge, my knees stay locked into position, my back stays flat, and I'm loading up my hamstrings and glutes in the back of my legs. From the front, the knees should be staying locked in position over the ankles or driving out and not collapsing in. The hip hinge is the first part of really learning how to deadlift well. Now let's talk deadlift setup. The first thing is to walk up to the bar with a hip width stance, with your shins almost touching the bar. Once the feet are set, it's very important to not move them at this point, or you'll have to reset everything. Once you've hip hinged down and back, the next step is to slowly sink everything down to the bar, keeping your back flat and loading up the legs. Once at the bar, the arms should be taut, or you might have to load some tension in the arms just as you go to move the bar. That's a more detailed cue we'll go over in the next video. From the front, you should look like a tight little cannonball, knees over ankles, feet straight and firmly planted. Again, spreading the floor, no collapsing in the arch, and a nice big chest. From the side, the glutes, hamstrings, and shoulders should be set. The bar should be right on your shins, knees not too far forward, back flat, arms taut, and shoulders over the bar. Once you're set, think push into the floor, all while keeping a flat back and a tight core. As the bar travels up the legs, keeping as close as possible and pushing the hips to the bar. Finish the movement by being straight up and down, glutes tight, core tight, and shoulders down and back. Then, to take the bar down to the floor, you hip hinge back by pushing your butt back, keeping the bar closed, and then sink everything down to the floor in a nice and controlled movement, again, keeping your back flat. In the simplest way, that's how I can explain and execute setting up and doing a deadlift. That's pretty much it. There's a bunch of other cues and concepts to go over in the deadlift because it is such a complicated lift, but that's a whole other video, and to keep this video much shorter, that's how I'm going to set up the deadlift and give a visual for that movement. The last and final lift to go over is the split squat. The split squat being bang for buck, maybe the most important lift on this list, but it's usually not everyone's favorite. It's a great lift because of all the benefits involved, but it's also a hard and, let's say, tedious exercise. It's great for injury prevention, balance, unilateral strength, or strength through one leg versus both at the same time, flexibility, and much more. It is also kind of the base point for other lifts like a reverse lunge or forward lunge. The setup is rather simple when broken down, and this is where visualizing lines of force really helps when it comes to lifting. From the front, my foot is directly in front of my hip. If I were to draw a line from my hip over my quad, through the middle of the knee, down my shin, and finally through my foot, the line should be straight. And the same thing for the back leg. From the side, the front leg should be a little bit less than 90 degrees, knee over ankle and foot straight. The back knee should be directly underneath my hips, and shoulders on top of that. The back toes should be tucked under and assisting in the movement and stability. If you were again to draw a line from the top of my head to the middle of my ear, that line should hit my shoulder and the center of my hips, a straight line up and down. From here, while trying to maintain balance control, going up and down for reps in the split squat. There are a bunch of other lifts that we do over at Edge, but I feel like these 5 were the ones that really put out there initially when it comes to the basics and starting off in training. The next video, I'm going to be going a little bit more into detail on some of the components of lifting, more specifics on some of the lifts, and a strong generalization of important guidelines. As always, thank you for watching. All of Edge's social media and the podcast are linked in the description below. The podcast Adventure to the Edge has new episodes that comes out weekly. I genuinely enjoy creating them, any of these episodes, and I think it's some of the best content I put out there. So if you haven't listened to an episode yet, I strongly recommend go listen to it. It's on Spotify and Apple Music. It's only sometimes about sports performance and training. We talk about shows, movies, life lessons, technology, and a lot more. See you in the next strength video.